I'm going to do speaker view, so I don't have to look at all these boxes. There you go.
All right, good evening. I'm Scott De Herrera, assistant editor at the University of Arizona Press, and welcome to our event, Camino del Sol presents Urayoán Noel. Joining us this evening is Rigoberto González, editor of our award-winning Camino del Sol series, which publishes poetry and fiction from Latinx authors. On behalf of the University of Arizona Press, I want to thank Urayoán and Rigoberto for sharing their time and hearts tonight. The University of Arizona Press is the premier publisher of academic, regional, and literary works in the state of Arizona. We disseminate ideas and knowledge of lasting value that enrich understanding, inspire curiosity, and enlighten readers. We advance the University of Arizona's mission by connecting scholarship and creative expression to readers worldwide. Founded in 1959, the press is a nonprofit publisher of scholarly and regional books. We publish about 55 books annually and have more than 1,600 books in print. These include scholarly titles in anthropology, archaeology, environmental science, history, indigenous studies, Latinx studies, Latin American studies, and the space sciences, as well as award-winning fiction and poetry series Suntracks and Camino del Sol. Featuring Noel's bilingual playfulness, intellect, and irreverent political imagination, Transversal contains personal reflections on love, desire, and loss filtered through a queer approach to form, expanding upon Noel's experiments with self-translation in his celebrated collection, Buzzing Hemisphere. This new collection explores walking poems, improvised on a smartphone, as well as a remixed classical and experimental forms. Poems are presented in interlocking bilingual versions that complicate the relationship between translation and original, and between English and Spanish as languages of empire and popular struggle. Urayoán Noel is a Puerto Rican poet, performer, translator, and critic living in the Bronx, New York. He has published 7 books of poetry in the prize-winning study Invisible Movement, Nuyorican Poetry from the 60s to Slam, and he edited and translated Architecture of Dispersed Life, Selected Poetry by Pablo de Roca, which was a finalist for the National Translation Award. Noel teaches at New York University and at Stetson University's MFA of the Americas. Rigoberto González is the author of 18 books of poetry and prose. His awards include Guggenheim, NEA, NYFA, and USA Rolón Fellowships, the Penn Volcker Award, the American Book Award from the Before Columbus Foundation, the Lenore Marshall Prize from the Academy of American Poets, and the Shelley Memorial Prize from the Poetry Society of America. A critic at large for the LA Times and contributing editor for Poets and Writers magazine, he is currently Distinguished Professor of English and Director of the MFA program in Creative Writing at Rutgers Newark, the State University of New Jersey. Please welcome Rigoberto González and Urayoán Noel.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Mari, and Savannah, and Abby, and everybody in our Camino del Sol University of Arizona team. You've been amazing. This is not only a presentation of Ura that though primarily we're here to shine a light on Ura's work. There's also an inauguration for our series. This is not necessarily, we're going to call it a new series. We're going to call it the next stage of the series, with many thanks to my predecessors, Ray Gonzalez and Patty Hartman, who did a wonderful job with this series, bringing into the literary conversation so many Latinx writers who have become our leaders in many ways, and also the folks that we turn to as our not only literary ancestors, but our inspirations as well. I do want to make a couple of announcements. First of all, I want to thank our editorial board. A couple of them are here with us tonight, but I'll name them all. Such an impressive board. So thank you to Francisco Cantu, Sandra Cisneros, Eduardo Sicorral, Janine Capó-Cruzet, Angie Cruz, Nali Diaz, Aracelis Girmay, Ada Limon, Jaime Manrique, Justin Torres, Luis Alberto Rea, and Elena Maria Viramontes. And also, we have a couple of titles coming up. So I'm very happy to announce that we're going to be publishing Valerie Martinez's next book of poetry titled Count, and also a debut collection of stories by Reyes Ramirez called The Book of Wonders. Both excellent, excellent books. But I'm gonna have a conversation with Ura in just a bit. But first, we gotta listen to this spectacular performer, somebody that I admired for so long now. We were just talking previously, and I realized at this moment that I've read everything that Ura has ever written. And it's been such a pleasure to see that momentum and that movement and that trajectory become even more exemplary than when I first encountered it. So I'm gonna let Ura take it over, and then we'll have a conversation later. Ura, Urayoán Noel.
Buenas noches. Gracias, Rigoberto. Gracias, Camino del Sol, University of Arizona Press. It's an honor and a joy to be here with you virtually, but here nonetheless. I want to begin by, of course, sending a shout out and much love to all Asian and Pacific Islander communities here and around the world. And I also want to show off my fabulous t-shirt from the organization. I think if you can see, it says independence there, from the organization Independent Guahan. And I think of it also in the spirit of decoloniality that links us together. And so I encourage you to check them out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and so on, Independent Guahan. So I will, I asked Rigo what I should read, and Rigo actually had some suggestions, right? And I'm here to please, especially someone who has been a cómplice in la poesía as much as Rigo. So I'll start with the first poem in the book, which is also making its way on the Transversal bot, which we can talk a little bit more about, but I'm really interested in those kinds of circulation. So I'll start off honoring both languages, and then I'll mix it up in the spirit of the transversal relationship between them that animates the book. No longer owed. A hurricane destroyed your sense of home, and all you wanted was to pack your bags in dead of night, still waving mental flags, forgetting the nation is a syndrome. All that's left of the sea in you is foam, the coastline's broken voice and all its crags. You hear the governor admit some snags were hit. Nada, mere blips in the biome, nothing that private equity can't fix. Once speculators pour into San Juan to harvest bad seeds of an idea. She tells you Santa Clara in 56 had nothing on the brutal San Ciprián. And yes, your abuela's named María. Oda indebida. El huracán arrasa lo que amas. Quieres viajar de noche sin manera, sin maletas, izar mental bandera. Del mar llevas la espuma, panoramas de una patria inacible y sus dolamas. Voz ronca de disturbios mar afuera, inundando ciudades de salmuera. El gobernador vende melodramas para saciar al buitre inversionista. Le ora a San Ciprián y Santa Clara, sabiendo que la isla se vacía. Dice tu abuela, y a primera vista, que el viento de la muerte no compara. Ella, que también se llama María. Oh sol de Nueva Orleans, cómo derramas sangre colonial en cualquier acera. Hay diques y turistas donde quiera, fantasmas de un Caribe en hologramas, hemisféretros, ya sin más proclamas, escupamos al Dios de cabecera, hashtag que el verdugo sea el que muera. Cotorras, revoloteen las ramas para que el bosque de voces resista. Tiburones austeros pongan cara, de que al crucero le llegó el día. Se acabaron los memes de conquista. Vivimos para que otro sol brillara. Revolución que nadie domaría. Thoughts of Katrina and the Superdome. El Caribe mapped with blood and sandbags. Displaced, diasporic, Spanglish hashtags. A phantom tab you keep on Google Chrome. Days of hunger and dreams of honeycomb. Our souls reborn or worn thin like old rags. The locust tree still stands, although it sags. Austere sharks sequence the island's genome. And parrots squawk survival politics, whose only power grid is the damp dawn. There's no other way, no panacea. Throw stuff at empire's walls and see what sticks, or tear down the walls you were standing on. Why not run that question by Maria? Beyond the indigenous chromosome, pese a los ancestros que reclamas, your gut genealogies in chains and gags. Tu genealogía es prisionera. Paraded through the colony's main drags, cadenas, mordazas, lucha obrera, and left to die. So when you write your tome, cenizas de carbón sobre las camas, please note each word must be a catacomb. El ácido vital que desparramas must be a sepulcher and must be en una extraña especie de aporía. Cradle in some sort of aporía. Quema las joyas de tu fantasía, where bodies draw on song as guns are drawn. Cual H silenciosa de huracán, resurgent, silent H in huracán. Tus muertos insurrectos gritarán. Your egg song booms ashore. Ashe, María, quebranto y contracanto. Ashe, María. So sticking in the zone of form, or maybe we can call it queer form, I'll do this, which closes out that first section. In this first section, I'm working from English into Spanish. And this is called fractal or fractal. And again, I'll mix it up at the end. We land on some point scanned, far from our mind. Freedom, a kind, not yet defined. You bet it sounds like wet, deep grounds in caves with mounds of graves whose sounds, whose words night saves. Dead birds will sing, lost herds, I'll bring you home, wellspring, rhizome, bone beach we comb to reach the pus in each of us. Remote we're thus afloat in time, a coat of grime, my dear. Let's rhyme the fear away with queer dismay and joy today. Somos viejos tomos, quejos de lejos. Me dices que grises quieren lises, mueren, nos hieren los dioses. Dos voces graves, toses aves muertas, sabes ciertas fallas, puertas. Hallas tus playas, luz hecha, pus, mecha, sin fecha, fin, menos, ruin, plenos, ríos, truenos, bríos, tuyos, míos. To boy, suyos, unplanned, homos, convoy, nuyos. Okay, and I'll do this. This is from the second section, which is actually started off as this manuscript called Out of State, thinking about states, statements, statelessness, right? Rigo asked me to read this, so I'll use it as an opportunity to shout out all the fine folks at Canto Mundo, of course. So Canto, and you can fill it in there if you're in the house. The previous poem was bisyllabic terzerima, right? So 2 syllables, and now this is just back into the more conventional sonnet. But if it has a constraint here, it's a line from the poet Javier Zamora, Javier, you're out there, un abrazo, who was commenting on the bats in Austin in 2015 under the bridge in Austin. So a shit ton of bats is the passing comment by Javier Zamora that serves as epigram. So for my cantomundistas, bat sonnets. Our freestyle flows like a shit ton of bats, to steal a phrase from Javier Zamora. Taxonomists of capital flora, we barnstorm the city with verbal gats and take aim at the hedge fund plutocrats trolling us on social justice fora. Freedom is a flick of the fedora. They own our land, but not our poets' hats. Looking for a city to get lost in, we were dreaming when we came upon it. Its border, the bodies that we crossed in, cursing in street Spanish, not doggone it. Much like the Chiroptera of Austin, we tag a bridge with our sonar sonnet. What's in a shit ton? I'll ask Zamora. It's hard to count amid the faceless frats. After a few palabras and true dats, we explore poets, channel Dora. No map, no app, surveying ahora. Where are the bodegas and laundromats amid the loft conversion ziggurats? What gives a place its iconic aura? Hint it's not about ironic flannel, artisanal cupcakes or IPAs, a meme workshop or a hashtag panel for zombie PhDs and MFAs. Our dream streets broadcast on a bat channel whose bat signal reverberates for days. Barrio echolocution sounds like bats. Bachata petrarchs wail for their Laura. Tejano bars bleed raza sonora. Must every tech bro with designer tats sit 12-buck drinks to wax DJ ersatz? We want sounds, not streaming. Boxed Pandora, beat spelunkers aiming for Aurora, moonwalking in chancleta high heel flats. In Spanish, bats murciélago. Blind mouse? I see us all in the beer-soaked mundo. We bump and grind, and Lupe owns the house, and Sandra swings that reggaeton tundo. So much flor y canto in our mundo, because there's no teoría without chaos. El Google says they're Mexican free-tail, the bats that migrate to that Congress bridge, not called my back, but someone's privilege. Think Congress and the suits they've never failed and the corporate corpses they've retailed. Electorally, they'll speak our language. Yo hablo un poquito, not a smidge. But who are the deported and surveilled? Who owns our urban archipelagos? Words privatized. Once the escuela goes, nostalgia factories hard sell agos, like Big Macs at the maquiladora. But no one bats down us murciélagos. We swarm vanilla streets till Gomorrah. Bat coda. Running out of rhymes, ending in aura, and going batty from a lack of bats, I map the spirit's wordless habitats. Free riffing like Williams on his cora. Son of a fierce Boricua señora, as am I, one of many Rican brats, all born too late to be Boogaloo cats, watch Clemente bat or Julia score a run on line. My broomstick bat will shatter. That Clemente rode a wooden stallion. I'll invoke the island's antimatter, the hemisphere's popular battalion that claims its peace, beautiful rebellion of batshit particles born to scatter. Cool. Let's go on to the final section. And so here I'm working from Spanish into English. And again, all this is relative. And so actually I'll mix it up because you're tired of seeing me read from the book. This is called molecular modular or molecular modular. And it's one of the two kind of pandemic pieces in the book. So one of the last things in there. And I was inspired by the Mexican conceptual and male artist Ulises Carrion, also queer, and his idea of using postcards to create like a network, which was kind of internet before the internet. That was actually the last show I saw before lockdown, was an Ulises Carrion show here in New York. So I started making postcards in the pandemic. And so let's do a little show and tell. This is all A's, C's, G's, and T's to go with the code that makes up the sequence of the coronavirus. So you can make, it's modular because you can make your own combinations of A, C, G's, and T's. Vámonos. Molecular modular, molecular modular. Ah, you remember when things went viral. Acuérdate de aquel sueño viral. Can you find lifelines in the death spiral? Con vida estás empírico espiral. Goddess, who will document your retiral? Guerreras ahogarán al admiral. Time yet for the performative eye roll. Tiempo es por fin del guiño neuronal. Are silences in lines, enough spacing? Algo en silencio, entre líneas pasa. Can writing be no contact with tracing? Cuando se escribe sin contacto, es traza. Graphics matter most when self-erasing. Grafía del yo es borradura grasa. Too soon on all fours to start embracing. Tarde es para el que ñangotao abraza. Are solemn pages ready for their screen? Ante pantallas, la página es condena. Can quatrains somehow rhyme with quarantine? Cuarteto rimará con cuarentena. Gray skies can sometimes signal the unseen. Gris cielo al fin, o revelación plena. Trauma was always written in between. Trauma es lo que el azar desencadena. As digital as a corpse, orgasm. Ay, digital cadáver, ¿y tu orgasmo? Can poetry be both fold and spasm? ¿Cuál poesía de pliegue o de espasmo? Gravitas can grow its own sarcasm. Gritos de lucha se oyen sin sarcasmo. Terrors are whole since everyone has them. terrenos del terror donde me plasmo. Am I ready for a modular song? Atento estoy ante el modular canto. Can a modular muse ever be wrong? Con musa modular cabrá un quebranto. Grow molecules into a chain that long. Moléculas se aferran tanto. Trembling cells will become a voice. How strong! Tantas células dan voz al espanto! I'll just do a couple more. Let's do a couple of PR pieces. So a lot of the book is re-embodying in a way Puerto Rico, New York, diasporico, especially in the kind of post 2015, post 2017 moment. So. Psalm 44 palavers, Odia 44 palabras. You have given us up like sheep intended for food and have scattered us among the nations. Psalm 44. Nombra tu primer año asesino en la ciudad ausente del antropoceno y la falsa modestia del plancton en las cuevas galácticas o pueblo de ardides frente a la frontera nevada donde nos buscamos como quien da mamadas y traga apenas su propia flema y se da cuenta que las políticas del cuerpo a nadie salvan. Aunque hay abuelas en la última galaxia esperándonos para darnos cama y sopa y sanarnos, sincretizando almas de 4,000 muertos, 44 calibres, sin pesebres, libres, islas soñadas donde toda revolución es apátrida. Name, if you can, your first murderous year in this city of Anthropocene absences and remember the conversations you had with no face, just a dollop of sky and a brutal assault of retail spite and rhymes to remind you of what's after air. Who will hear the humble brag of plankton and the coves of galaxies as pretty and far as the kiss never given, and how much howling from those other possible worlds will seep through the plastic motherboard so the goddesses can catch us clicking ash. There is a town of ruses near the snowy border where we seek each other out, and yet guttural logic fails and sidewinder music gives way to surveilled napes and eyes of bristle, and there is no net at the bottom of the sea. When you give head and swallow only your own phlegm is when you realize that body politics won't save you, even though there's no other kind. So you savor in the dank smell, you savior is the taint as tanks and bloody punchlines, empty streets. There are grandmothers in the last galaxy waiting to take us in and heal our skin and syncretize souls in soup and remind us that we are our accidents and accents, finding freedom in the brackish water with no silencers on our misremembered joy. 4,000 deaths means 8,000 shoes and 44 caliber palavers without pallbearers, because cadavers sing the psalm of respite under chemical skies where estuary water meets the sea by our toes that stubbornly claim these islands of dreams and drums where every revolution is unhomely. And so I'll finish it off with, I read that at the protest in Puerto Rico in the summer of 2019. So it's such a weird kind of formless poem, but it fit the figuring it all out, right? It's the figuring it all out poem. And that was very much the spirit of that moment of resistance when we protested in Puerto Rico. And so I'll finish with the poem I wrote inspired by those protests, and I'll dedicate to all the folks I hung out with, Raquel Sala Rivera, Nicole Cecilia Delgado, La Corilla. This one's for them. And then I'll do a little improvisation just to take us away. Soberano, Puerto Rico, 2019. Ahora te la pasas perdido en el viejo San Juan, como turista o cachorro en su laberinto. You're lost all the time in old San Juan now, like a tourist or a puppy in a maze. Cuentas los balcones en elegantes ruinas y te preguntas por qué cambiaron los adoquines por estos tan chillones. You count the elegantly crumbling balconies and wonder when they replaced the cobblestones with these way too shiny ones. Tocas uno y se siente frío y tieso como risa de político. You touch one and it feels as cold and brittle as the smiles of politicians. Buscas en Google Maps los nombres de los lugares que alguna vez te nombraron. You check Google Maps to read the place names that once named you. Pasas la plaza de armas y te acuerdas de la risa oceánica de poetas y pintores compartiendo botellones de vino caliente en vasos plásticos. You pass Plaza de Armas and remember the oceanic laughter of poets and painters sharing big bottles of lukewarm white wine in plastic cups. Ya se han ido muchos muertos, otros a salvo en suburbios o en la diáspora. They are gone now, mostly dead, some safe in suburbs or in the diaspora. Y confundes los callejones que eran todo para ti, donde a veces te besaban, pero por lo general te quedabas con las ganas bajo una enorme luna tropical. And you mix up the alleys that were everything to you, where you were sometimes kissed, but mostly hoped you would be, under a huge tropical moon. Se sienten tan foráneos hoy como los callejones de Wall Street, y con el banquete de los buitres, Wall Street nunca está muy lejos. They feel as foreign as Wall Street alleys now, and with the vultures' ongoing feeding frenzy, Wall Street is never far away. Y no obstante, te hiciste de un alma aquí, una economía afectiva sin desarrolladores. And yet you developed a soul here, an effective economy that knows no developers. Y esa alma ahora le canta a los muertos, a quienes todos les debemos. And that soul now sings through the dead to which we are all indebted. Muertos de huracán, muertos de austeridad, muertos de patriarcado, muertos de deudas al blanqueamiento. Those dead from the hurricane, dead from austerity, dead from patriarchy, dead from whiteness and its debts. ¡Que vivan los muertos! Pues todos ellos bailan con nosotros por la plaza y hacia Fortaleza, el palacio de gobierno colonial, cuyo nombre es Imperio y empuje a la vez. Praise the dead! For they're all together with us, dancing down the plaza and toward Fortaleza, the colonial-era government palace, whose name means both fortress and strength. No eres tú a la vanguardia, son las mujeres, la juventud, les no binarias, los de los barrios más pobres. You are not on the front lines. They are women, they are kids, they are non-binary, they are from the poorest barrios, pero estás con ellos, alentado por su osado gozo, por su certeza que les llegó el momento, que es también tu momento, por cómo se besan hasta el hueso, con riguroso embeleso, como querías que te besaran hace tantos años, bajo esa misma luna infinita. Yet you're with them, emboldened by their fearless joy, by their certainty that their time has come and your time as well, by how they kiss each other lazily with ruthless abandon, as you wish you had been so many years ago under that same boundless moon. Los tambores convocan al mar de cuerpos hacia fortaleza, hasta que jurarías poder tocarles los chalecos antibalas a los policías y ver tu reflejo en sus cascos. The drums summon the sea of bodies toward fortaleza until you swear you could touch the cops' riot gear or see your reflection in their helmets. Sabes que algunos bailan con ustedes. You know some of them are dancing with you. Los encubiertos tirarán basura o fuegos artificiales para justificar balas de goma y gases lacrimógenos que pronto te harán correr al ritmo cadavérico del trap hacia esa pulsión nuestra. Es mayá y es mameyá del más allá, del más allá. Those undercover ones will toss debris or light fireworks to justify the rubber bullets and tear gas you will soon be running from as reggaeton beats keep the skeletal pulse of our hereafter lives. Este es nuestro soberano. This is our sovereign summer. And here the poem ends. Se acaba el poema, pero que no se me olvide Kelly, ni Ricardo, ni el resto del corillo, just to make Rigoberto uncomfortable, because I promised I would. I will give you a tour of La Yarda. I'll give you a tour of the South Bronx. I'll give you a tour of the post-industrial city, donde la voz se pierde, donde se improvisa otra posibilidad de ser. De aquí desplazaron boricuas. They displaced boricuas from here y los siguen desplazando, and they keep displacing them. Sometimes the displacers have tenure. A veces los desplazadores tienen permanencia. Está complicado esto. This is difficult, yo. Pero les hablo desde otra diasporosidad. I'm talking about another diasporosity. The flamingos my mom sent me from Florida. Los flamingos que mami me llamó de Florida, me mandó de Florida, son un chiste interno, or some kind of inside joke about spatiality, location, and voice, sobre la espacialidad, la localización y la voz. Y les podría hablar 3 horas, and I could talk to you for 3 hours about that. How I improvised poems for this book and then transcribed them, and now transcribe them back to voice on Zoom or on a bot. But I have to stop porque Rigoberto me mata. I want to make room for Rigo's fabulosity amid all this porosity of voice. Gracias.
Brad, shaking us the heads up in the last poem, man. It just me sacaste de onda con este último poema. Pero bueno, Ura, el único, seriously. I'm so proud that you know the series is inaugurating with your beautiful book, Transversal. Let me get my bearings here, porque just to remind all the attendees, if you have any questions, please put them on the chat box while Ura and I have a brief conversation. So Ura, you know, I mentioned earlier that I read all your work, and what really impressed me about this particular book, and I'm glad that you began with that poem, because the first line of that poem, right, about the huracan, the hurricane, I think that this book is probably your most personal book. And even though you engage a very public discourse, and you're engaging the public, you're engaging all different kinds of audiences, it still feels very, very intimate to me. There's an intimate relationship that you create with the readers through various methods, either the language, through the leaps that you make with the puns. At times, I'm stunned by some of these surprising, moments in the book. For example, when I came across the portmanteau Fergusinapa, I had to stop. Because not only did those two events happen the same year, right? But there is Ferguson and Ayotzinapa right there. But I was going to ask you, why do you think that is? Or do you see it that way as well? That this is probably your most personal book to date?
Gracias, Rigo. Well, yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. One is I don't think you can be Boricua and deal with like the post 2015, moment, right? Promesa, Maria, all that, and not dig out some blues, right? If you have it, right? Not dig deep and really, have to ask your poetry, right? Sometimes to sustain you, because there's nothing else, right? Then on a personal capacity, a lot of stuff happened. My dad died, right? The same year as Maria hit, right? And so for a long time, I really, me, I'm always generating puns, always, right, free riffing, and it felt like for a year plus, right, I had nothing, right? And so I'll tell you a story in that sense about, writing Maria, and I hate to kind of reinscribe that trauma, but I remember Evie Shockley asking me for something for Poem a Day, and I thought, okay, Evie gave me the momentum to actually force myself to write something since I felt that I couldn't, and that's how that first poem happened, right? And so initially, actually, the first thing I wrote about that was actually the meme poems that are in the book, right? I felt like I couldn't even, writing felt like reinscribing a lot of just the violence of it. And also being in the diaspora, right? Not being in Puerto Rico, is this my place? Do I need to be, do I need to be speaking this? So all that had to be figured out. So initially I was just so at a loss for words. I was just like writing captions for memes. That felt like the best that I could do. And eventually I said, well, the sonnet has been a kind of, terapeia for poets for a long time, right? That vessel where you take all the pain and you distill it. So I think it has a distilled feel. And then I knew I wanted to not, reify the sonnet, because it's very like European, and so I made sure that last stanza of that first poem was a decima, right, to kind of root it in that more vernacular Boricua tradition. But I think the personal also comes from Buzzing Hemisphere, right? I'd envisioned that book as a book that was going to have a lot more to say about brain hemispheres, right? About like being epileptic and be this really kind of intimate book. And I didn't quite know how to do it. It was too much with like the political hemisphere. So I feel like sometimes the puns get in the way because you're honoring multiple meanings at the same time that are in tension, right? And so I feel like this time I kind of built it from the ground up, as opposed to having like that pun that I'm just, riffing off of. I just kind of assembled the puns, if maybe that's a better way to think about it. So partly it was what I felt I didn't do in Buzzing Hemisphere. I wanted to do a book that was more Caribeño, that was more about PR, that was more about home, and home is always, right, messy. But I didn't realize when I decided that it was going to be this painful and have to deal with so much stuff, personally and politically.
Well, certainly the inspiration is there, coming from all directions, from the greatness of tragedy, but also the greatness of strength of the Puerto Ricans. And then, sometimes you even have some unexpected sort of moments of inspiration with, like, for example, the Bakus, right? Which are those poems in the plastic bags, which it seems like such an obvious thing, but until, then you present it, you're like, why didn't anybody think about that? It seems so, it's right there in front of our faces. The bags and the haiku is perfect. I was going to ask you about the vocal improvisations, and you provide some links there. We can see you performing in the book. You provide the links, and we can see you performing this on video. But what was that process like for you? Because you talk a lot about translation, mistranslations, transcreations, which is a great word to use. So for what was it play here with the vocal improvisations and then placing them on the page and then taking them out again?
Thanks for that. I mean, I think the walkie-talkie techies, as I call them, right, the walking, talking, techie improvisations, were really important to the kind of more intimacy that you see in the book, right? I feel like folks think I'm a natural performer, but I don't see myself that way at all. I stutter, I hunch, I have bad posture, I'm a geek, right? So I have no musical talent to speak of, right? So I feel like I've willed my way through this assemblage of wordplay and stuff into a kind of performance style. But the walkie-talkie techies force you to break that down. There you are with your voice, right? So it's like this long process of loving your voice and all its imperfections and it's all its rawness and in those moments of just also not forcing myself to be poetic, right? I think that's important because I knew the book was going to have traditional stanzas because I wanted to go back to that. I should tell a side story. It's also a book that you write once you have tenure. That made a big difference, right? When I was finishing the Nuyorican book and I was, I won't say that I wasn't all in it, but maybe I didn't have the time to just really tease out the kinds of intricacies which can make all the difference. And so that's one reason I wasn't writing that many formal poems, is really I was a kind of, more experimental poet, partly because neoliberalism made it that way, right? I didn't have time to actually edit and refine sonnets and so on the way, or villanelles or whatever, the way they demand, right? So I knew I wanted to get back to that now that I had a little more time, but I didn't want the kind of artificial music, right? Of what could become artificial, of just borrowed meter, right? To overdetermine the book. I wanted a room for the rawness, right, of it. And I also like that, you have to distill stuff when you're writing in classical form, right? Because you have to, that's what the architecture of the form does for you. But I wanted the distilled and the raw at the same time. I wanted the kind of messy and imperfect and, messed up in a lot of ways. There's a lot of being messed up. I think a lot of us feel that way about the world in general, right? So I thought it was important to honor the messed upness of the world. I think, I don't know if Vincent Toro's here, maybe not. I think he's doing an event for his book, but I think he has this, he told me this thing about how sonnets are always imperial in his mind, right? Which I think come on, it's a tool. You do whatever you can do with it, right? I think it means classical sonnets, right? And I'm like, okay, let me see if these sonnets, right? If I can find a little noise for these sonnets. And I think allowing the kind of noise of those improvisations is one way of doing that. And that opened up a whole other poetics of transcription. Okay, you've done these poems on video. What do you do with them now? And again, that comes out of necessity. In 2011, 2012, this press in Guatemala, Catafixia, who are wonderful, they published the poet I translate, a Garifuna Guatemalan poet, Winston Gonzalez, asked me for a book, but typical, struggling Latin American press, I said, we have 3 months. And I'm like, I can't do a new book in 3 months. So I cobbled together the poems that I had, and I just started transcribing walkie-talkie techies, the first ones that I'd done, and to see if that could be a thing. And it worked out better than I thought. And over time, I kind of let that transcription, right, become a poetics in its own right. So if you go to the Transversal bot, where I actually work the other way, I take the PDF of the almost completed book. I think there might have been a couple of tweaks before you go to the printer, and then you just dump it onto Twitter, and then Twitter removes all the formatting, all the special fonts that we have for each language, right? And it becomes this other exercise in transcription, this time subject to the kind of constraints of Twitter. So yeah, I think it was initially about finding a rawness in this what I knew was going to be a very classically formal book in some ways, but then unexpectedly it opened up this whole poetics of transcription.
Thank you. It's interesting because when you read that first poem, I thought, well, now I'm going to see how to read some of these poems on the page. But then you read them in different ways. So you didn't really provide an answer. I don't know if that was deliberate on your part. But then I thought, okay, well, it doesn't give me an answer. But then I thought, well, maybe that is the answer. That you just kind of go with it. What does your eye do to you? Someone who's bilingual myself, I tend, it's almost like reading simultaneously. So it's really interesting how that works. Have you received any other kind of feedback of these format that you use, where you switch from one to the other?
Yeah, I think it's too new. Still, I don't know that I've gotten feedback specifically on that, but I knew that I wanted a kind of an intimacy. Actually, intimacy, I think, is an important word in the book. So I wanted the English and Spanish to be closer, right? So in Buzzing Hemisphere, I'm doing more like the transcreation, which is a term that comes from Haroldo de Campos, the Brazilian concrete poet and neo-Baroque poet. And so his work was very much about galaxies on the page, right? It has this kind of monumental, in a way, very like bro, right? Very like, hey, here's the stuff that I'm just like showing off on the page. Here's my architecture for the page, right? And I knew I didn't want to do that because I'd done my version of that in Buzzing Hemisphere. So I wanted a kind of vulnerability, right? Where you felt like the languages were, we're kissing each other in a way, right? And I try to honor that in performance by saying, okay, there's a structure to the book, right? In the first section, it's the poems I self-translated from Spanish to English, and then the last section vice versa, mainly. I think there's a couple of tweaks to that, but I don't want to let the poem on the page, right, become the last word. As you know, I come from a performance background as well, and I always love that idea. Lorenzo Thomas calls that in writing about Black arts poetry, right? The poem as a score for a future performance, right? So I see what's on the page as a kind of beginning, right? Every time in performance. And so I don't think I'm gonna do it the same way all the time, but I certainly am gonna find ways to like have English and Spanish kissing each other, right? The way they're doing in the book. At some point it can become unreadable, right? If you actually did, one line and one line and one line and one line and one line, it would be just a pain to listen to, right? So I found that kind of sweet spot where I'll read a whole stanza in one and a whole the other, and then I'll mix it up at the end. So it's a work in progress. This is what my third reading now of the tour. So we'll see what I'm doing in a couple of months. But yes, definitely that intimacy was something I wanted for just for the book, right? Given what I'd done before. And I also think of it in terms of, right, Édouard Glissant, and I want to shout out Glissant and also shout out Beatriz Santiago Munoz, the brilliant artist whose image is on the cover, who's a great reader of Glissant. So Glissant has all this riff, right, on how to be Caribeño, right, is to be constituted through these like projections of these like languages of empire, right? Not just empire, right, because you have Creoles and indigenous languages, but you have the shadow of that always. And I'm like, okay, what if instead of just having a kind of self-contained chunk in English and Spanish, right, I kind of find the grieta, right, the crack in the empire, right, and think about a different kind of architecture that's less monumental, it's more fragile by design. So Glissant is in that too.
Find the crack in the empire. That's a line right there. I want to take a question from the chat box. This one's from Ricky Maldonado, who asks, Ura, as you know, I chanted each line as I read the collection. A part of me wonders if you anticipated that performance, if you have any sense of how readers will perform, embody, or live with or through these poems.
That's a good question. I mean, I feel like my default maybe 15 years ago in Cool Logic would have been to make like the more rhyme poems, the poems in traditional forms, poppy. That was like the whole thing, like, oh, make it fun, right? And I still like that. I'm not going to give up on, being pop and being fun and being entertaining. The world is a dark place, right? So I'm going to find joy in language and celebrate that. But I didn't want necessarily to be that kind of poppiness in the performance, right? Because I thought there were different kinds of formal poems. They were weird. There was a lot of enjambment, right? Of course, there was kind of the deliberate mistranslation and the effect that creates on the page. So I wanted to find a way to bring that right into the performance, which is why I use a little, phone app. Sometimes I was doing it very subtly in the background, and I'm like, do they think that there's a TV playing in the background? Good, I want that, right? So I'm finding a ways to think about also ambient as a kind of poetics, right? I think Edwin Torres is here, so I love his, what is it, Popetology of an Ambient Language. He has a book called that, which I think is a really cool way of thinking about it. So it's pop, but it's a kind of ambient pop, perhaps, right? And I always love that, being queer, el ambiente, la escena, right? You think of el ambiente as this, the space that we inhabit, but el medio ambiente is also like, the environment, right? The natural environment. So I think that that sense of a kind of ambient form, I don't know if that's, I'm thinking of that as I go along, right? That's tied to the kind of, not just landscapes, but like seascapes, right? Of El Caribe. It's something that I was, I wasn't thinking about in advance, but I was, I became more aware of as it went along. And I think I want any kind of performance to be, to allow the reader to be lost at sea. So Ricardo, Ricky, if you were able to bring your own flow into that, right? And it's nothing like what I did, que bueno, right? Enhorabuena. I think that's kind of the spirit of it. So I think there's multiple entry points, which is also something that changed in my work over the past decade as I became more of a process poet, right? Even in really traditional forms, I'm thinking, okay, can I do something with punctuation where there's less punctuation and the reader has a choice here, right? Of how to, how to respect a breath or run on the line and create a different kind of music. So I tried to do a book that even when it's in traditional forms, there's room for the reader, right? To find their own breath in it.
Thank you. Well, I'm also a big fan of La Lógica Cool, wonderful book. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that the gravity in this book kind of changes things a little bit. Even as we're enjoying some of the linguistic pleasures of the book, thinking of that last poem, of course, and we run into words like Julias y más, which open up. Oh, great! That's what you want. Exactly, absolutely. Bring her in. Or also some of the other tribute poems that you have in there that were quite moving. The one that you wrote for Francisco Ixalarcón, which I absolutely love, and of course the one for Reverendo Pedro Pietri, which is fantastic as well. So towards there, it's interesting how you negotiate that. That because you have fun in some of the, you have so much fun in some of the poems, and in others, we think it's gonna be fun, but then the subject matter sort of gives it a different tone, and all of a sudden, we can still keep track of the rhyming, we can keep track of the rhythms, but there's another element, that's presented to us, and we have to negotiate with. And I'm wondering, with that, is that also sort of similar to the first question I asked you about being just so personal? Is that what politics are at work there for you?
Well, I think I tried to make this book, I think I used the phrase queer form, which is also a phrase that I think there's a queer form special issue. I forget who the editors are of the journal, a bunch of Latinx folks, but I'm sorry, I'm blanking who you are, but but so they're thinking about, form in a conventional, right, literary sense, but I think I'm doing so in the narrower, right, sense of what we do as poets, and even in the specific sense, right, of traditional form. And trying to find that queer entryway into it. So I'm glad you mentioned Francisco Alarcón, because I know it was very important to you as well. But I always felt that. I always felt that he didn't get the kind of I mean, he's a giant, of course, but I'm not always sure he gets the love that he deserves as just a kind of genius of a kind of queer form, right? And as also someone who was doing self-translation, I think before, myself or like I said, Rivera or folks like that, really, it's more common, I think, now to see self-translation. But for me, certainly one of the first people I saw do it, right, was Alarcón, right? And I loved it because he had like the snake poems, the really processual, decolonial stuff before that, but he could use that same kind of radical translation strategy for these really quiet poems that just were like quiet sonic booms. And I thought, okay, I'm looking for a kind of intimacy. I'm looking for a ratchet up, but also ratchet down. And I think he'd love to be in vogue, right, in that range. But yeah, so I think his work was an example. You don't have to be like super over the top all the time, right? Sometimes just the kind of presence and absence of one language and the other. I think that's what I love about Alarcón's work, right? It's almost the same. The words are really similar. They're very simple words, right? It seems like something that that anyone could do, but there's that queer ambient aspect to it where there's like a texture that's like slightly off and it totally shifts the entire poem. And so that was a great object lesson for me, is that, hey, queer form can be just that tweak, and all of a sudden the whole thing unravels. So maybe a kind of erotics of whatever that is that animates someone like Alarcón's work.
Of course, we have to give a plug to Alarcón, who's also Camino del Sol author. We published From the Other Side of Night, Del Otro Lado de la Noche, his name was selected, and a reissue with the snake poems, which was in 3 languages, right? Spanish, English, and Nahuatl. So available, University of Arizona Press. Of course, the first impression that I've gotten or responses is the beautiful cover of this book, and I was going to ask you about the artist.
Sure. I mean, well, Beatriz Santiago Munoz is an artist from Puerto Rico. Her work is very hard to categorize. She's mainly thought of as a filmmaker, but I think her process is really interesting in the sense that her work is very investigative. She does a lot of kind of on, not field research, but like stuff that's rooted in landscape and the landscapes of Puerto Rico and del Caribe, right? And also talking to people. There's this kind of like vernacularizing impulse in her work, but also this very kind of Glissantian sense of just like the layeredness or the sedimentation of Caribbean space, right? And so this particular image is, from a project where she's looking at just like military maps, right, and kind of maps of empire, right, as they shape, right, the kinds of physical and psychic geographies of Puerto Rico, but also of ways in which we can just blow that up, right, and turning into something else, right? So to me, when I thought, okay, who would do the cover for this, immediately I'm like, Bea would be this obvious person. And then I thought, wow, it's a Glissantian book. She's this incredible reader of Glissant and has written about, kind of artist statements, right, that connect the work that she's doing to his. She also does, works in performance, although she's not primarily a performer, and we haven't worked together closely, but I think we're aware of each other's work. So that's one thing. I don't know what you feel about it, but to me, it's always, I'm the typical or the bad poet who just has no insight into visual art. I love it, but I have no talent at it. I have no special skill, right? So I try to cue myself into visual artists and say, okay, they're doing a kind of translation. They're asking some of the same questions that I'm asking, right? But they're asking it, in a different medium that's not mine. So I think also of Beatriz Santiago Munoz as someone who is thinking about the limits of practices such as filmmaking, performance, site-specific art, writing, right? And I'm like, wow, that sounds like exactly, the kind of person I want to reflect on as I think about the ways in which I engage performance and translation and all these other modalities. So definitely highly recommend her work. And also she's someone who has a kind of visibility within, elite spaces and like famous museums, but still does a lot of really a lot of work with artist collectives and and more grassroots work. So I think she's thinking about that, the kind of inside and outside the institution, which is something that I worry a lot about as a tenured professor, right? You can't be the cool logic poet anymore, right? Once you're like on this side. So I think it's more important than ever to keep investigating and to keep knowing who's on the ground and who's building those bridges, right? And try to learn from their work.
So if anybody has questions, please make sure that you write them on the chat box. We have another one for you, Ura, from Kristen Dykstra. She asks, Ura, I think you are just starting with a bot, but can you talk a bit more about this experiment?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned before, I kind of fell into this poetics of transcription, partly out of necessity, because for that Guatemala book, I had to transcribe these walkie-talkie-techies to flesh out enough for a full-length book, and then thought, how do you decide what to do? Do you transcribe pauses? Do you how do you make room for that, right? And so I thought, okay, I've now done this poetics of transcription, and some of those transcriptions are included in the book. How do I honor that, right? And think of a project that remediates, right? Would be the kind of fancy media studies term, but I love that also remedying, right? In a way, finding a remedy, right? For kind of the problem of the voice as it relates to language. So I think I don't want to get all pretentious. I'm like for some silly Twitter thing that's tweeting one tweet a day, right? But I like the idea that in a way Twitter was kind of returning the process of transcription right back at me, right, with a vengeance. As I mentioned, I'm just copy pasting from a PDF of the final manuscript, and so I had some decisions to make in terms of what do I do, how or where and when, right? And ultimately, I decided to just do as little as possible, knowing that taking some minimal pains, right, to do things like format stuff that Twitter really destroyed, right, because it wouldn't look anything like that. I fixed, but for the most part, I didn't fix it, and I just let the Twitter version be its own version. So it's only the poetry, right? There's no notes. Rigoberto's very generous prologue is not in there. There's no acknowledgments. So this whole kind of processual poetics, ni te enteraste, you won't find out about it. By the book, right? Which is what we're here for. But it's a way to give the poetry this other life. No font variation, no italics, no bolds, right? So the breaks get all messed up in some ways, right? Much more so the poems where I'm doing funkier stuff with layout, right? All that gets kind of streamlined. And I did the best I could to make it legible, right? If the format got all out of whack, well, I fixed it up so it would be legible. But that's about as far as I went. So there'll be, missing hyphens here or there because I don't know, Twitter doesn't seem to like those when you copy paste, stuff like that. And I just want to let it be for a year. And I also wanted to give myself a kind of timeline. I've been, in a way, walkie-talkie-techies are durational performances. Usually I'll improvise until my phone runs out or I can't anymore, right? And the longest I've gone is maybe 40 minutes or something. At that point, usually the phone just can't, will stop something will go wrong with it. And so I think of the Twitter bot as a kind of durational performance on the part of, of the bot, right? And one tweet a day until it's done. That'll take a long time. And by that time I can say, okay, my tour is done, right? And then I won't tell you how long, right? Because I guess you can do the math if you, or do an approximation of my math if you have the book and care to do so. But I also like the idea that it'll have this kind it'll also like counter what I think of as the noise of Twitter. I don't have to tell you what Twitter has become, right? In the post-2016 moment and all the evil that's on there, right? Politically, poetic chisme, the whole thing, right? And so I'm not, and there's value to that. There's good stuff that's come of it. But I think I love the idea of there's no hashtags, right? There's just poetry. So I love the idea of the modesty. Here's like one tweet, like doing it durationally until we finish. So it's a way of bringing back maybe, reclaiming Twitter for like labor, right? Here's el trabajo, la labor de la poesía. I think that's kind of pretty in a way, right? Twitter is actually doing poetry work along with me in a modest, very chill way. If you want to follow it, follow it. If not, not. And, keep the virality and keep the, the bochinche and all that is elsewhere. It's a little tweet, the little bot that could is doing its thing. And by the way, Rigo, thanks for reminding me, it feeds into my perfect slogan.
Okay.
You ready? Okay, let's do it. If you haven't bought the book, then book the bot. Okay. That's terrible.
Oh, well, modesty and Twitter don't compute, but I'm glad that there's an effort here being made. We have another question here from Ricky, porque es bien preguntón. Pregunta Ricky, I really admire the book's capacious and encyclopedic impulse and energy. Were there any poems or threads you weren't able to include or thread in?
Yeah, there's always stuff that you can include. I feel like, obviously, the pandemic shifted a lot of stuff around. There's a side of me that wants to do 10 pandemic poems, right? But I'd say more it's about how to frame what I came up with. That was kind of a struggle. So I did this poem, the really long one, the Cuaderna Via, right? I forget what it's called now, but it's like 10 pages of like monorhyme and quatrains, right? And so that one's long, so I wasn't going to read it here. But so that piece, I began writing it in Cuba, actually, right? And when I went to the Havana Book Fair in 2014, and then I guess I can say I went illegally, I guess, in this administration, I'll say it. So on the weird routes, right? The Mexico, I went through Mexico, and that was really kind of weird. So it was this other Caribe through like Mexico and Cuba, and so that's why I called it periodo espacial, spatial period, playing with the special period in Cuba, which now seems to me like, maybe too cheesy, but or not appropriate, but whatever. That's what it was called. I honored that. And so, for example, I got rid of I do that whole beat thing where I'm like, oh, this was written here and at that time, right? And in that case of that poem, I actually got rid of it because the translation happened at a later date and I felt it was a different poem. So that was actually one of the hardest things, was thinking, okay, You want to like vouch for the authenticity, right, of the lived experience of the poem, right, and this more, you know, what you would think of as more as a beat idiom, right? But then you want to honor also the kind of sedimentation of translation and the distances there. So I got rid of it. It doesn't say any longer that it was written in Cuba or whatever. It's just this poem. But I struggle with that, how much to frame, what to explain and what not to explain. How much, so it doesn't become this like really precious, which it's gonna, my work is geeky. What are you gonna do, right? And you wanna be generous in giving people insight into your process, but it can always come across as, oh, look at me, I'm doing a bot. Yeah, so I think that part, thinking of what is a kind of account of my own process that feels inclusive rather than just, you know, boastful or like, you know, self-congratulatory, right? So I took a lot of pains in the form, right, and saying, okay, open this up, you know, less is more, right? Pare it down, right? What can you get rid of? So actually, it's one of the, maybe that's why it was, you know, I took it to the next level because I actually cut out stuff, right? Even though it's not that short of a book, I think I took pains to, you know, to pare down what I felt, you know, just like bogged it down. So.
We have one more question here, and this is Sheila Maldonado. So a friend of yours, friend of mine, and you know, she's out there. Sheila asks, these are Sheila's words, because this is the only way that Sheila can communicate this way, and she's amazing. Also the book of poetry out. Talk about your ridiculousness and why you never give up on humor and rhyme and all the stuff academia seems to want to squash. And into the Sheila voice that you get it.
I love it, Sheila. Thank you, because you know we talk and say the same. We just, I don't know, we have that weird Gen X, corny ass, just like, I don't know. I feel like that sustained us, and I think, you know, when you maybe, I don't know, growing up a latchkey kid and watching a lot of crap and just letting that crap, you know, constitute you. I mean, in Puerto Rico, like bad alfa rock pop songs or whatever, just like, you know, crap TV. I feel like that and you develop this, you develop a sense, well, this is what constitutes me, right? This just like overdose of crap. So I think there's a little bit of that that's generational, right? You learn to, you know, you didn't have the internet, so you had to like find ways of repurposing, right? The kind of craptastic pop culture that was around you. But I think, you know, Sheila and I have talked about this a lot also. I mean, I feel like learning from people like Pedro Pietri, who was like, I remember the first, having read Puerto Rican Obituary on the page and then witnessing Pedro, I'm like, is this like your weird uncle, right? And then of course, then I met Jose Montoya, like they're all like that, right? They're all your like weird uncle, right? And your weird tia, all of them, right? Lorna D, they're all fabulous and they're all our heroes and sheroes and queeros. But I'm like, okay, so I feel like, I don't know, that sense also for me, or also, you know, as a queer person, also as you know, as someone with epilepsy, and just, I don't know, I feel like I could be a freak in the world of poetry, right? And I feel like I was, you know, I was lucky to learn from people who kind of, you know, wave that freak flag, and my sense is, okay, I'm going to be kind of weird and, you know, and random if I can be, right? Because those people gave me a sense of what was possible. I still remember reading with Pedro and Miguel Algarín, rest in power to both of them, at the Nuyorican, like one of those events, typical, where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm like nobody, and I'm reading with Pedro and Miguel, and nobody else showed up. For some reason, it was like this other poet and the two of us, right? And all I remember is like Pedro grabbing the hook. Folks remember Pedro's hook? He would lick the hook and just actually hook you off the stage, right? And I'm like, wow, this guy, you know, amazing. And this guy's like a legend in the community and gets treated with respect and reverence, right? So, and the same with the poets in PR, right? With Angela Maria Davila, folks like that, just folks who were kind of genuine and kind of, you know, personajes, right? And so my sense is their work reflected that, this work that was always, you know, digging deep and finding the kind of randomest, weirdest, right, most daring way to do it. So I don't know, I feel like I owe that to the world to not be another poet. I also don't have an MFA, I have a PhD, so I come from all kinds of educational privilege that way. So maybe I wasn't taught a better way and I cobbled it together from these, you know, other poets in these other spaces. But no, I think as someone with a kind of more canonical, right, knowledge of poetry traditions, right, because, you know, I have a PhD and, you know, there were books in my house and all that. This was like a revelation to me, like, wow, you can, you know, poetry is like an attitude, right? And it's also a kind of psychic you know, psychic waving of the freak flag. Yes, more power. We need that, right? So anyway, I try to honor the people who mentored me by saying, let me do something that people wouldn't expect, just because, you know. Just
also, I think we're aging into that stage too, so that's kind of nice.
way, right?
Well, thank you so much. You know, thanks everybody for attending. I know that Scott's going to come and say a few words, but again, you know, this is fabulous, fantastic book, Transversal. And again, thank you, Uda, for really enlightening us on so much about your process, your work, your life, your creativity, and you being you. Extraordinary. Gracias.
Gracias, Rigo. Gracias, everybody.
Yes, thank you, Urayoán and Rigoberto, for sharing your time with us tonight. That was absolutely incredible. You know, those of you who know me know I'm rarely at a loss for words, but the power of Urda just leaves me absolutely speechless. So thank you, Urda, for your beautiful words and for allowing us the privilege to help share them with the world. Tonight's event could not have happened without the support of my colleagues at the University of Arizona Press and our University of Arizona Libraries family. We really hope to see you all at our next event on Wednesday, March 24th, celebrating Empowered Latinos Transforming Arizona Politics with authors Lisa Magana and Cesar S. Silva. For more information, you can find that all at our website, where you can also purchase your copy of tonight's book, Transversal. And finally, thanks to all of you who joined us tonight. You know, one of the best things about publishing books like Transversal is the opportunity to enjoy them together. So thank you all for being here and have a great evening.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.